Ted Bundy. As one of the most infamous serial killer cases in American history, the saga of Ted Bundy in the 1970s arguably changed the way society thinks about serial killers and the horrors of sexual violence and murder. Bundy confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. Bundy seemed to mostly prefer college-age women. He attempted to kidnap Carol DeRanch as well, but she escaped. Her kidnapping, survival, and ensuing trial resulted in Bundy's first conviction. If you're familiar at all with Bundy's case, you've probably heard about the tan Volkswagen Bug he used much of the time, which was also the car police were searching for. He was sent to Utah State Prison for a sentence of 1 to 15 years, but was extradited to Colorado in January 1977 to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. Rather than hire a lawyer, Bundy intended to represent himself and so was given access to the law library in Pitkin County District Courthouse, where his trial was to be held. He escaped by jumping out of a second-story window in the library. Bundy was caught in Aspen a few days later while driving a Cadillac he had stolen. After 2 very public trials in Florida, Bundy was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder on 1979. While Bundy confessed to 30 murders and was convicted of 3, some experts believe the number could really be in the hundreds. Alan McCarty. Alan McCarty Jr. Milton was found guilty of threatening to kill Circuit Judge Stacia Warren after she ruled against him in a child custody case. Circuit Judge Matt Foxman said on Wednesday that McCarty, 36, also threatened a prosecutor's unborn child, prompting the crude convict to erupt in the courtroom, the Daytona Beach. "What a bunch of f***ing lies, you stupid piece of shit," McCarty yelled at Foxman, who earlier threatened to duct tape McCarty's mouth for his disruptions during his trial. "You threatened my life. F you." Foxman then ordered McCarty to be removed from the courtroom, but he kept yelling curses and racial slurs at the judge and an assistant state attorney. McCarty then spent the remainder of his sentencing hearing in another room where he watched the proceeding through a one-way glass, the same location he spent much of his trial. McCarty also insulted and told off his public defender, Ryan Belanger, cursing at him in court. Belanger said McCarty's mother wanted to apologize for her son's behavior, but declined to speak in court. The jury of 3 women and 3 men took about 30 minutes to find McCarty guilty of 2 counts of threats or extortion and 2 counts of corruption by threat against a public official. Besides threatening the judge, McCarty also threatened a pair of dispatchers in the phone calls. Anders Breivik. Anders Breivik was on trial for the murder of 77 people in twin attacks that took place in Norway. He was captured by cameras crying his heart out after the judge finally made his ruling. He later confessed to reporters that he was not in tears due to the sentencing, but because he was sad to see his country dying. Whether Breivik was crying because of the sentencing or not, we can never be sure. But one thing we are sure of is that he broke down immediately after sentencing. Either way, a bad man is behind bars, and the world is a little bit happier and safer. Aaron Hernandez. While the former New England Patriots star, Aaron Hernandez, died mysteriously by hanging himself days after his acquittal, he still earns a slot on this list for his actions before his death. The ex-NFL player who was serving a life sentence at the Souza Baranowski Correctional Facility broke down into an uncontrollable teardrop session. Besides his defense attorney after the judge found him not guilty for the shooting of 2 men back in 2012 in a drive-by shooting in Boston. He broke down in tears and was even captured blowing kisses to his daughter right after the ruling on his case. George Brinkman Jr. This is George Brinkman Jr. He was charged with 5 murders that included a 71-year-old man, 64-year-old lady, 45-year-old lady, 21-year-old young woman, an 18-year-old teenage girl, could help whining and crying like a baby, as he was ordered held on $75 million bond, $25 million for each of the victims. George Brinkman Jr. was captured crying as the judge read the sentence in Parma Municipal Court. He was shackled, and one of his arms was in a cast as he looked down through most of the court hearing process. If the crying meant he was sorry, there is a fat chance he is getting away with it. Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos, or Lee Wuornos, is considered the first female serial killer in the crime history of the USA. She killed 6 men and committed robbery. She was working as a sex worker in Florida State when she started her killing spree. During her childhood, she was mentally, physically, and emotionally abused by her grandfather. Later, she started working as a prostitute at age 15. When she was working as a sex worker in Florida, she was often tortured and humiliated by men. Some men even beat her brutally. During her trial, Wuornos was remorseless and angry. After she was convicted and given 6 death sentences, Wuornos began screaming at the jury. She called the jurors scumbags and warned the judge that she would kill again. She had spent a decade on death row. Wuornos showed no desire to delay her sentence before her execution. She said that through death, she wanted to pay for the crimes that made her so notorious in life. Finally, she was executed by lethal injection at 9:47 in the morning on October 9, 2002. Sordid, sensational, and chilling. Her story was retold in 3 movies, 2 books, a comic book, and even set to music in an opera. Joseph DeAngelo. The notorious Golden State Killer eluded authorities for more than 4 decades, but police have finally caught their man. While some would expect a monster in handcuffs, Joseph James DeAngelo was a seemingly ordinary former police officer living near Sacramento until April 2018. The 74-year-old was described by former coworkers as a regular Joe, despite his serious demeanor and non-existent smile. He's said to have been a meticulous homeowner, with attention to detail certainly befitting an ex-cop. But suddenly, in 2018, he was charged with unspeakable crimes. The Golden State Killer committed more than 50 rapes and 12 murders across California throughout the 1970s and 1980s. In over 40 years, nobody's been convicted of any of these heinous crimes until now. On June 29, 2020, Joseph DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 26 charges in a raping and killing spree. DeAngelo, who sat in a wheelchair and was covered by a white face mask as victims and family members gave testaments, rose out of the wheelchair and spoke free of the face covering. He was ultimately charged with 13 counts of murder, with additional special circumstances, as well as 13 counts of kidnapping for robbery. He received 11 consecutive life sentences for the crimes he did admit to, ensuring that he'll eventually die in prison. Ronnie O'Neill. The trial was 3 years in the making, but after a few hours, a jury found Ronnie O'Neill III guilty of the brutal murders of his 9-year-old daughter and the mother of his 2 children in 2018. His son barely survived the attack and lived to testify against his father at the age of 11. Prosecutors began their closing arguments the same way they began their opening remarks, with the 911 call from 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, O'Neill's girlfriend, as she pleaded for her life. Prosecutors said, by then, she had already been shot, and while the recording continued, O'Neill can be heard beating her with a shotgun. O'Neill chose to represent himself. Much like his opening statements 1 week ago, he yelled as he spoke to jurors, saying his son's statements were inconsistent, and he believes his son was likely coached by the Hillsborough County detective who later adopted him. Scott Nelson. Murderer Scott Nelson was sentenced to life on Thursday in the first-degree murder of nanny Jennifer Fulford. He testified at trial he did in fact kill her. At the penalty phase, he took the stand again and asked the jury to sentence him to death. His defense tried to show that the death penalty was the wrong way to address the case. Nelson had a tough life, endured abuse as a child, spent 25 years in prison, and had head injuries. Nelson broke into the home of Fulford's employer on September 27, 2017, kidnapped her, and killed her so there wouldn't be any witnesses. The defendant admitted that he wanted to get money so he could abscond from probation. He made several outbursts in the penalty phase. First, he complained about his brother's testimony and later protested when a federal prison expert said Nelson had had problems with Muslim inmates. He also clashed with his defense, saying they hadn't been asking certain questions. That was it for today's video. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button.